Young Turks. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and Cenk is out for the week, but we're gonna have a series of awesome panels and panelists, including today with David Dayen, the executive editor at American Prospect. Wanted to make sure I get that title right.
Excellent.
And Emma Vigeland, our very own Emma Vigeland, who will be here all week. You're gonna be on pretty much every show across the network this week.
Yeah, no, I was working all weekend and now I'm stretching myself even thinner here. It's a great time.
Well, that's how we do it at TYT.
Yeah, exactly.
So make sure you check out Emma's reporting at Rebel HQ, youtube.com/RebelHQ to watch some of her videos. We're actually gonna cover a few of the interviews that Emma conducted in New Hampshire, including one with Elizabeth Warren and another with Amy Klobuchar. She did get a little salty with you, I saw that.
A little bit, just a little bit.
So I'm looking forward to that. And then later on in the show, we are going to have Alonzo Bowden and Jason Carter join us for hour 2. We're also gonna get into a discussion about Tulsi Gabbard's appearance on Dave Rubin's show. Before we get to that though, we have some international news to cover, so let's get right to it.
President Trump revealed in a series of bombshell tweets late Saturday that he planned to secretly meet with Taliban leaders and the president of Afghanistan Sunday at Camp David.
Now that meeting came as a surprise and it was abruptly canceled, and we found out about that through a series of tweets that Trump put out. And I'm gonna go ahead and read those tweets to you and give you some more details about what this meeting was supposed to be about. Trump tweets, unbeknownst to almost everyone, the major Taliban leaders and separately the president of Afghanistan were going to secretly meet with me at Camp David on Saturday. They were coming to the United States tonight. This is a tweet from Saturday night. Unfortunately, in order to build false leverage, they admitted to an attack in Kabul that killed one of our great soldiers and 11 other people. I immediately canceled the meeting and called off peace negotiations. What kind of people would kill so many in order to seemingly strengthen their bargaining position? I don't know, we should take a look at what's happening in Yemen. They didn't, they only made it worse. And then he continues to write, if they cannot agree to a ceasefire during these very important peace talks and would even kill 12 innocent people, then they probably don't have the power to negotiate a meaningful agreement anyway. How many more decades are they willing to fight? Now, as we all know, Donald Trump has wanted to pull out of Afghanistan, and now that the 2020 election is quickly approaching, it's one of the, if he succeeds in it, it's one of the things he wants to point to as a success in his first term. However, as with anything Trump tweets, what's happening behind the scenes is very different from what he's putting out there publicly. So we're gonna get into the details of why these negotiations really fell apart. But first, let me give you the background on how this meeting came about in the first place. At some point during the meeting, the idea was floated to finalize the negotiations in Washington. Trump suggested that he would even invite President Ashraf Ghani of Afghanistan, whose government has not been party to these negotiation talks, and get him to sign on. So I want to stop there for a second. So the United States and the Taliban have been negotiating a peace deal without any type of involvement from the actual government of Afghanistan. And in the meantime, Trump is making concessions on behalf of the Afghan government as part of these negotiations. So as soon as the Afghan government got involved, clearly there were some issues and there were disagreements about the concessions that Trump provided to the Taliban, namely that the Afghan government would release Taliban prisoners, which is not something that Afghanistan agreed to do. Now, in the days that followed, Trump embraced an even more remarkable idea. He would not only bring the Taliban to Washington, but to Camp David, the crown jewel of the American presidency. The leaders of a militant organization, and this is writing from the New York Times, deemed terrorists by the United States, would be hosted in the mountain getaway used for presidents, prime ministers, and kings just 3 days before the anniversary of September 11, 2001 attacks that led to the Afghan war. All right, so let's open this up for discussion. I just wanna say right off the bat, I am not one to say that you should never negotiate with so-called terrorists. We have negotiated with terrorists in the past. We're actually fighting a war for terrorists in Yemen right now. So I'm not in the camp of no, you should not negotiate with the Taliban. However, the way Trump wanted to do this and the way he wanted to bring the Taliban to Camp David days prior to September 11th, I think was not a good idea, to say the least. And the way the negotiations have gone down so far have been pretty bad, especially when he hasn't involved the Afghan government. And based on reporting, Trump wasn't even really involved in the negotiations himself until the very end because he wanted that spectacle.
Well, I mean, that's somewhat common, right? That you do this stuff at the staff level and then you bring the world leaders in at the end to close and seal the deal. The real problem here is, I mean, let's take a step back. The Afghan government controls like 4 streets in Kabul, and that's about it. And if the Americans do in fact leave, which in my view we should, the government is going to likely collapse. It's going to fall to the Taliban. No American president has been willing to take that risk. We thought maybe Trump was so desirous of saying, I brought the troops back, and so uncaring of the fallout that he might, but no, he's not willing to do that either. So apparently we're locked into Afghanistan for 100 years doing nothing of consequence, forestalling an inevitable solution or an inevitable consequence of our eventually leaving if we ever do.
But the Taliban and the Afghan government, despite how marginalized the Afghan government is, both want the United States troops to leave their nation. So if Trump and his team, if you're saying that it's more going to be on the lower levels that they're having these conversations, if they had a shred of competency, they would know that that is a common goal to bring those 2 groups together to have a conversation if they actually wanted peace. The reality is that Trump acts impulsively. He sort of wants peace and has these anti-interventionist inclinations, but when it comes down to it, it's the establishment of the Republican Party that will always put a wall up in front of him, and he wants to be liked by his covert of people around him and by his supporters, so much so that that's what's going to win out at the end of the day. And he's so easily swayed by who's the last person in the room. So while that might be his initial instinct to be anti-interventionist, it's never going to get past the first step. And this is just another example of it. And it's frustrating because he could be the Trojan horse for us people who love peace, who want us to get out of these forever wars and actually accomplish this goal, because only a Republican can for the Republicans to accept it, and Democrats and liberals are principled enough to say, okay, we'll be fine with it even if Trump does it.
Yeah, I mean, it was the idea that if anyone could get away with this, it could be Trump.
Right.
And no, he's not willing to do it. And frankly, the Afghan government and the Taliban's concerns and wishes mean absolutely nothing to US foreign policy in any fashion.
Which is why we invaded there.
Exactly.
And we've stayed there for decades.
This is about an American president trying to save face. And unfortunately, he's going to continue to have Americans there who are still in harm's way, as those tweets show.
So I want to get to the war hawks who surround him and his administration in just a second, but I do also want to give you some information about the soldier who died in this Taliban attack. As I mentioned earlier, 12 innocent people were killed, including a soldier who Army Sergeant First Class Ellis Angel Barreto Ortiz. Now, he was cited, his death was cited as the reason for why this meeting didn't happen and why the negotiations fell apart. But in reality, these Taliban attacks have never subsided. Like, they've continued. More American military have died as a result of these attacks. What really happened is there were so many disagreements and there was so much chaos in the middle of these negotiations that it just kind of fell apart. And my interpretation of this is that the administration is now pointing to this particular Taliban attack for their reason to kind of leave the negotiation behind at the moment.
Definitely.
They claim that they want to continue negotiating, but we'll see. Now, I want to go to Mike Pompeo, because Pompeo's rhetoric here perfectly demonstrates and illustrates what you guys are talking about, the kind of hawkishness that you can expect from someone like Pompeo, and to an even greater degree, John Bolton. Take a look.
We're not going to withdraw our forces without making sure we achieve President Trump's twin objectives. Any reduction in our forces will be based on actual conditions, not commitments, but actual conditions on the ground.
Well, given that conditions appear to be worsening,
Chuck, that's not true.
You don't believe? Okay.
I don't believe that's true. If you're the Taliban, conditions have been worsening, and they're about to get worse.
What is, okay, you say about to get worse, so you're going to, does this mean we are going to increase the military activity against the Taliban?
We're going to make sure that everyone in the region understands that America will always protect its national security interests. I'll leave to the Department of Defense to talk about specifics, but no one should underestimate President Trump's commitment to achieving those goals.
So it's just clear who surrounds Donald Trump. So you guys are right in that he has these inclinations. He has this feeling that, hey, voters are sick of these forever wars. They want to get out. But when you surround yourself with the likes of John Bolton, who's even more hawkish than Pompeo is, in this administration specifically, well, you're gonna have some issues. And I wanted to give you some details about what they were negotiating. What were the terms of the deal as they stood? The deal called for a gradual withdrawal of the remaining 14,000 American troops over 16 months, with about 5,000 of them leaving within 135 days. In return, the Taliban would provide counterterrorism assurances to ease American fears of a repeat September 11th from Afghan soil. But I mean, even in that case, do you trust the Taliban to avoid another terrorist attack? I mean, I wouldn't trust them. I would take the proper national security measures to make sure that an attack like that doesn't happen in the future. But
well, but I mean that is the doom loop of this militarized policy that we've continued to see. We can't leave because what would happen if we leave?
Well, I want to leave. Don't get me wrong. I want to leave, but like this whole notion that like they're going to promise that they're not going to do any, they're not going to be naughty anymore. Of course, they're going to, throughout these negotiations, they've continued with their attacks.
But I mean, nothing in that says we're not going to take over the government and rule the country. I mean, they could not harbor a terrorist and still subjugate women and do everything that the Taliban was doing in controlling Afghanistan, which was not great situation for the Afghan people.
It wasn't. I mean, but
and frankly, though, that's their business. I mean, we have invaded this. Yeah, like I'm obviously sympathetic to the plight of women and all of these individuals who have to suffer under these authoritarian governments, these religious governments that are being run by maniacs. I mean, but we fund one in Saudi Arabia. So the fact that we're showing this false concern about, oh, what happens if the Taliban actually gains official control as opposed to just 90% control of Afghanistan is absurd. So we're doing all of this in bad faith, and that's what's frustrating about this conversation.
Yeah, I want to leave you with one final bit of information on this. Graphic 11, the senior Taliban leader on Sunday said that Trump was fooling himself to think that he could bring the Taliban and President Ashraf Ghani together at Camp David because we do not recognize the stooge government in Kabul. So there were deep disagreements during these negotiations. The way that the Trump administration is trying to spin it as if everything was hunky-dory, they had agreed on everything was fine. It was just that one final terrorist attack that they did that changed everything is just a lie. They hadn't really come to an agreement. There were still deep differences, and that doesn't mean that you should avoid pulling out of Afghanistan, but you should know what the facts are and how the negotiations really went.
And let's just note for the millionth time that if Obama invited the Taliban to Camp David, like the entire country would explode. Yeah, I mean, it's seriously.
Well, let's get to that now.
Oh,
you
fun.
ready?
Oh,
Yes.
I'm ready.
All right. Following news that Donald Trump canceled a meeting with Taliban leaders at Camp David only days before 9/11, some of his old tweets toward Barack Obama have resurfaced for good cause. Now, Trump was very critical toward Obama when it came to negotiating with terrorists. And I want to read some of those tweets to you. This is a tweet from January 13th of 2012. Trump had tweeted, while Barack Obama is slashing the military, he's also negotiating with our sworn enemy, the Taliban, who facilitated 9/11. That wasn't the only tweet. There were several of them. I'm not even gonna read all of them to you, but one other one.
Slashing the military like in an alley, like shivving them. Just not even including the budget part.
Pathetic Barack Obama is sweetening his offer to the Taliban. And then he said, read The Art of the Deal. A little plug for his book. So it goes on and on. Look, what I found fascinating was the damage control we saw from Mike Pompeo the morning after Trump had tweeted about the meeting falling apart. And so let's go to the first video. Here he is speaking to Jake Tapper, and Jake Tapper asks him, what if this was Obama?
I can't help but think that if a Democratic president had talked about having the Taliban come to Camp David to negotiate a peace process that was not already a done deal, that you as a congressman, as a soldier, as a veteran, as a West Point graduate, that you would be rather upset.
Yeah, Jake, you're just wrong about that. I've been fully supportive of this effort. The direction that we have taken at the State Department, the effort President Trump has given us guidance to go deliver on something I think is important, it's valuable. I think the timing is just right. We'd made enormous progress. I know who the Taliban are, and I know who Al-Qaeda is, and I've seen that UN report. I will tell you that they describe the Al-Qaeda leadership as being happy about the conditions in Afghanistan. Well, a lot of them are in their graves. And so make no mistake about it, we will continue to punish, we will continue to pound, we will continue to fight, we'll continue to protect the American people. We will never construct a deal. If I was worried about Barack Obama and President Obama, it was because he was prepared to leave without ensuring that we could protect America. This administration will never do that.
So that last statement perfectly summarizes one of the reasons why Trump is gonna stay in Afghanistan. I mean, that is the kind of influence that surrounds him in the White House. And at the same time, come on, let's keep it real. We know the situation would be very different. The response from someone like Pompeo would be very different toward Obama if Obama were doing the exact same thing that Trump is trying to do.
But when you say that this is the group that surrounds Trump, it's frankly the group that surrounds both parties.
Yeah.
In terms
definitely.
Of the blob, what is sometimes known as the blob, which is the sort of diplomatic and intelligence and military communities within Washington. They have the same mindset that Pompeo just said right there. We can't leave until we've secured the zone, but we have nothing to do to be able to do that. So we're just not going to leave.
So we're just gonna punish and pound them.
Because it's gotten us very far. So.
And using a soldier's death as an excuse is actually kind of offensive to the memory of that soldier, because it has nothing to do with one tragic event. It has everything to do with the foreign policy mentality of the United States in a bipartisan fashion. And it does wrong to the memory of the soldier to say that he was the reason, or his death was the reason that we're staying.
Right, and Obama got elected, and there were all sorts of promises when it came to changing foreign policy, changing the course of foreign policy in America. But in reality, Obama expanded Bush-era foreign policy. Drone strikes increased under him. Our civil liberties continue to be violated under the Obama administration. So you're absolutely right. And there is this notion that if you don't play ball with the military-industrial complex, especially if you're a Democrat, you're weak on national security. And that is, I mean, think about it. That is a criticism that's perpetuated by the right wing, and Democrats just fall right into it.
It's because they're terrified of the military-industrial complex, that huge apparatus that you're talking about, which is even more influential in Washington than I think people realize. And what's fascinating to me about how Jake Tapper framed that question is he started it off the exact right way. Isn't there hypocrisy? Would you not be extremely critical if this was President Obama? But then he goes, as a soldier, as a veteran, as a West Point graduate, as if there's something wrong with diplomacy with the Taliban. And that's what's frustrating about the entire media coverage of it. They are anti-peace consistently, and they are anti-diplomacy consistently. That's a bias you see on Fox News, MSNBC, CNN repeatedly. They want belligerence. They were so orgasmic about when Trump dropped that mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, and they're silent, radio silent, that Trump within the first year, I think, in office already surpassed Obama in drone strike civilian deaths in Syria and Iraq. So this is just increasing, and unless we have someone who's a radical in the right sense in office, it's not gonna change because the power of the presidency in this regard has gotten completely out of control.
And while you thought that Trump might be someone who would reject the sort of establishment consequences of this, because his intellectual curiosity only extends to cable news. If cable news is reinforcing what you just said in terms of putting forward a belligerent, pro-intervention, anti-peace mindset, then that's the feedback that he gets, the only feedback that he gets while he's sitting in bed. So
it is interesting though, because if I recall correctly, back when Obama was president and when he did want to do these negotiations and when he was getting criticized from the right wing for being part of these talks, of course Fox News criticized him, but MSNBC was kind to him, CNN was relatively kind to him. They were a lot more in favor of working with and negotiating with so-called terrorists under the Obama administration. But when it comes to Trump, it's amazing to see how those very same cable news hosts change tune, right? Where all of a sudden they're the ones who are like, no, you shouldn't be negotiating with terrorists. This is offensive, this is terrible. But you shouldn't change your perspective on these peace deals depending on who the president is at that moment. And one other thing I wanted to give Trump credit for in a weird way, there are moments where he pushes through the pressures of the military-industrial complex. Remember, he was about to do an airstrike on Iran, and he called it off last minute. And the reason why he called it off last minute is because he went with his instinct and realized, okay, Pompeo's pressuring me to do this, Bolton's pressuring me to do this. This is not the right way to go about it. And so luckily, that wild card component of Donald Trump worked to our favor in that case. But yeah, he is surrounded by people, much like Democratic candidates in the past, by people who want to push for perpetual war, who want us in Afghanistan and pretend as if there's some solution in sight when really there isn't. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back, we are going to go to Emma Vigeland's interviews. You asked Elizabeth Warren about defense spending, and I wanna see what she had to say. So we have that for you and more when we come back.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you wanna get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment.
Welcome back to TYT. I want to read a few member comments for you. Theater Goddess says, can we do a TYT yes campaign to get Emma a spa day? What am I, chopped liver? Like I'm not included in the equation. Or an afternoon in one of those rooms where you just break stuff. I want that. That sounds good.
That's more Anna's speed. I'll take the spa day.
I like both, but you're right. I like breaking stuff. I think she earned a vacation. I agree. Market Geek says the US military and CIA have killed many people many times down through the decades to strengthen a negotiating position. It's a common practice, and it's absurd to imply that the US is above such tactic. Totally agree. And Megan writes, Trump wants to get friendly with the bad guys and bypass government. I am shocked, I say. Next, you'll tell me that he just makes up things as he goes. In this case, I think that he does have, he does have the power to make these deals. His administration does have the power to do it. It's frustrating when he takes money that's been appropriated by Congress for things like, let's say, FEMA, to fund his border wall. That's when his executive actions, I think, are super questionable. And a few TYT lives, Al Belzo says, in my opinion, Trump talking to the Taliban days before 9/11 is another publicity stunt to distract from his corruption. Well, don't you worry, we are going to talk about his corruption in hour 2 today. We're specifically gonna talk about an Air Force investigation into members of the military staying at his properties in Scotland. So he's just a nightmare.
They are beautiful. That's what he tells me anyway.
I mean, if he says it, it must be true.
Right.
The members of the Air Force are beautiful. I agree with you.
All right. Just want to remind you all, if you're looking for a place to keep your money that's ethical, look into Aspiration. Aspiration is a financial institution that will not invest your money in fossil fuel companies or any other type of corporation that does dirty things. So go to aspiration.com/TYT to open up an account. And by the way, TYT will be doing a rally in Houston this week. So if you are interested in going to our Houston rally, you can join Cenk Uygur and TYT Army Director Allison Hartson to meet other supporters and talk about how you can build power in our community. This is all happening next Thursday, September 12th at 2 p.m. Central Time. So you will meet at Hotel Alessandria in downtown Houston. And then finally, tomorrow, Emma, and I'm worried about this. You and I are gonna do a post-game AMA.
Why aren't you worried about this?
I don't, because people get hostile sometimes. Anyway, there's all sorts of like stuff flying around on Twitter, and it's frustrating to constantly have to debunk it. But tomorrow's post-game is a special Ask Me Anything featuring myself and Emma. TYT members and YouTube channel members can submit their questions via the chat and using the AMA hashtag. Everyone is able to watch. It'll go live at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Again, this is on Tuesday. Go to tyt.com/live to watch. All right, let's get to the rest of the news. Our very own Emma Vigeland went to New Hampshire and interviewed a couple of candidates, including Elizabeth Warren. Now, the question that she's gonna ask Elizabeth Warren is incredibly important because it has to do with something that many progressives have been wondering about. Why is it that Warren has consistently voted in favor of increasing defense spending? Take a look.
You have focused a lot on progressive domestic policy. You also voted for a military budget increase in 2017. How does that square with your progressive politics when we're talking about foreign policy?
If the question is, do I think we should cut the military budget? The answer is yes. And I'm now on the Senate Armed Services Committee. I've had this fight over and over. But there's another part to it too. We need to stop the control over our defense budget that's exercised by the giant defense industry. This is what corruption is all about. Putting lobbyists in charge of our government agencies, a lobbyist, former lobbyist in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. This is the heart of corruption. And the moment has come to call it out and to fight back.
So unfortunately, she didn't really answer the question. I mean, she listed all the issues with increasing military spending, but she didn't really explain why she voted for it. I want to give you more details on how she voted in 2017. So in 2017, Warren authorized $700 billion in defense funds. It included $640 billion for the Pentagon and an additional $60 billion for military operations in countries such as Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. This bill increased military spending by $80 billion, which far surpassed the increase requested by Donald Trump, which was $54 billion.
Yeah, and it should be noted that she was one of the overwhelming majority of senators who voted for this. So I believe it was around 90 senators or something like that.
Bernie voted against it.
Bernie voted against it. Kirsten Gillibrand also voted against it in her kind of ploy for the presidency, where she voted against everything that Donald Trump did, but not to take away from it, it was a really good vote. But yeah, Elizabeth Warren, when she's extremely left or really progressive on these domestic policies, and she's leading the way in many ways, there's a huge question mark when it comes to her foreign policy. And I wanted to ask her about it, and she dodged the question. There's really no way around it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that in Massachusetts, there is a large defense industry there. So like Connecticut or New Jersey, where pharmaceuticals are really big, and so you see someone like Cory Booker voting against the bill that comes that says, we'll bring drugs over from Canada to make them cheaper. Elizabeth Warren is from a state where Raytheon is one of the biggest employers of her constituents. So it's a really, really big industry in Massachusetts, and I think that's reflected in her votes. That's why she didn't answer my question if I'm speculating on it. And if it was a long form interview, I would have followed up with her on it, but these press gaggles, everyone's screaming over each other to try to get a question. It's amazing that she actually did answer mine, because she was the only front runner that spoke to us. I'm talking about, or spoke to the press. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders didn't speak to the press gaggles. She did, so the room was packed. I couldn't even believe I got a question in the first place, but yeah.
Well, Emma, as a corporate shill, I'm curious, what persuaded you to ask her that tough question?
Actually, her campaign sent me a check and said, ask us this question because I have the prepared answer for that.
We're obviously kidding, but I will say her answer to you was very different from the answer she gave the press in her justification for voting to increase defense spending earlier. I want to give you those quotes. She said, the defense bill has a long tradition of bipartisan cooperation, and I was glad to join that tradition. This NDAA will make a real positive impact on the lives of Americans. And then she also said, I apologize, that was the quote that I wanted to read to you. So she was much more flowery in her language toward it earlier.
I mean, let's just try to explain what that all is about. So the NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. Since, I believe, 1954, that bill has passed every single year. It authorizes defense spending for the particular year. There are many years where the other bills, they don't pass, they go into a continuing resolution, they get an omnibus package. The defense bill passes every single year. And how does that work? Every congressional district has some subset of some part or some weapon that is manufactured in that district, where jobs in that district are dependent upon that industry. And that's how they corral everybody to vote for this bill every year. It also usually has pay increases for the troops, and you don't want to have to face an attack ad that says you voted against the troops getting more money, our troops in the battlefield, yada yada. So that's how that bill works. Now, yeah, go ahead.
I do want to talk a little bit about the pay increases for troops, because I think this goes back to the failure in Democratic messaging. So if you're a genuine progressive and you have a problem with, half of our discretionary spending going toward the military, then why can't you specifically point to the fact that these increases in defense spending don't really trickle down to our soldiers?
No, not at all.
I mean, you just show them the number. Like, why are Democrats afraid to do press conferences?
You go. I'm cutting the defense spending in half. I'm cutting it by a third, but I'm giving the troops a 50% pay raise. It's over. The conversation's over, but they don't want to, because these industries are so ubiquitous and they're such a huge part of our everyday life. That's been the theme of the show so far. How the military-industrial complex has infected both parties, and only a crazy person like Donald Trump thinks to buck it, but he doesn't even go through with it because he doesn't have the power to follow through with it because it is so powerful all across the board.
Let me just add though one thing, because what she did say, what Senator Warren did say with you, is she pivoted to the corruption angle, and it is the fact that every defense secretary under Trump is either a longtime executive, lobbyist, or board member on one of the big 5 defense contractors. Mattis just went back to join the board of General Dynamics. Patrick Shanahan, who was his replacement, was a longtime executive at Boeing. And Mark Esper, who's the current defense secretary, was a Raytheon lobbyist.
Yes.
And Warren actually hit him very hard for that in the hearings that were held for him. Warren was at the forefront of this scandal around a company called TransDigm, which is a defense contractor that makes sole source parts for planes. So it's like little widgets in that, and they charge like 1,000% markups for these little widgets, and in the cost of an $8 billion aircraft, you don't really hear about it or think about it, but they're making millions and tens of millions of dollars in profits. She, along with Ro Khanna, were the ones who went to the Defense Secretary, Inspector General, and said, there's obvious markup problems going on here. It's the only one that has they're the only one that's held apart. It's a way to essentially, trap the Defense Department into buying these things. And the IG, the Inspector General, did a report, found that there were $16 million in overcharges over a short period of time.
Wow.
The Oversight Committee held a hearing on this and got TransDigm to give back that money.
That's amazing.
So, the corruption angle is not a bad angle to play.
It's
when
her
you're
best
talking about
angle.
defense.
It's her best angle, and I'm thrilled that every debate she says corruption, campaign finance reform. She does it better than Bernie Sanders, who should be saying it way more.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Right? But she didn't answer my question.
No, I'm not trying to apologize.
No.
I'm not the corporate shill in this.
Right. Except you are. But 99 times out of 100, Elizabeth Warren is fighting against corporate greed. I'm just asking why this 1 in 100 time, it was a little questionable.
This is the frustrating thing for me when it comes to Elizabeth Warren, because on one hand, when it comes to certain domestic economic policies, she brings the goods, and her plans are definitely progressive, they're impressive and very detail oriented. The fact that she managed to accomplish the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau before she was even a senator is incredible. She applied enough pressure on the Obama administration to get that done. But at the same time, she leaves much to be desired when it comes to her foreign policy. Her past statements when it comes to Israel have been incredibly hawkish, especially toward the Palestinians. She needs to clear those things up. And the way that she answered that question, while I applaud her for bringing up the issue of corruption over and over again, she does it during the debate, she does it at campaign rallies, she did it in that answer. She needs to at least take ownership of past mistakes and talk about how she plans to pivot toward a more progressive policy moving forward, because there are progressives who are iffy on her due to her past votes, due to her past statements. And I think that it's important for her to stop skirting that issue. I feel like she's been neglecting it.
I think the second part is the important part of that. I think the good question would be, what does your ideal budget look like? Now, 90 people voted for this budget. Whether she voted for it or against it, it was going to pass. But what does your budget look like? And she's put out a plan about the Defense Department that really only focuses on that corruption angle. She says no lobbyists will hold major positions within the Defense Department and things of that nature. But what does it look like? What can we withstand? Do we actually need to spend $700 billion on defense right now, more than the top 10 next countries combined? Or not? I mean, so what are the hard numbers? I mean, I think those are the things that she deserves to be pressed on.
And absolutely. And your point, Anna, I just think, just to button it up, is great. We know that her instincts are extremely progressive, but there have been question marks and blotches in the past, and instead of pivoting all the time around them, just address them. It would be so much clearer for all of us.
Absolutely.
And then we can move forward.
We got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to do a deep dive into Tulsi Gabbard's appearance on Dave Rubin's show. They got into so many different topics, including gun control, open borders, all sorts of stuff. We're going to discuss ideas when we return.